Okay. So this presentation is about preparing students for the English language exam. So I worked on this with the education coordinator at Open Cultural Centre. It was a really cool project to work on. It was the first time that the Open Cultural Centre had ever put students forward for the exams. And like a lot of organisations, they had been working on this for years, it seemed, with different volunteers, putting pieces towards this project. And then we were fortunate enough to be there when we could pull it all together and actually go forward to the exam. But this is a collaboration of people's work, like past coordinators, education coordinators, and other teachers. So I just want to make it clear that it is a work in progress. And yeah, we were lucky enough to bring it together at the end, but it's a lot of people's work going into this. So as I said earlier, I'm a secondary school English teacher from the UK. I have some experience working in Greece with the Open Cultural Centre as an English teacher, and then I worked in Samos a little bit, also as an English teacher, which was a really, really cool experience. And my contact information is on the screen there, but I'm sure Colette will pass that around at the end as well, if you have any questions. Okay, let me see. There we go. Okay, so the first thing I want to ask you is, why is it important to our students to be able to take the exam? So I'm going to give you 1 minute to think about this, and then I'd like you to give me some feedback about why you want to put your students forward for the exam, why it would be good for them. Okay, does anybody have any ideas? Why is this exam so important to our students?
It's something concrete to help towards their future, which is going to be challenging enough for most people.
Good, yeah, that's a really, really good point. Yeah.
Okay, and also having a formal qualification can lead to a job market.
Yeah, really good point, yeah. Careers, are obviously disrupted massively by what our students have been through. A lot of them don't have any formal qualifications, and this can be that big sort of step towards getting a job. And when they go to an interview, they can show this, and it sort of gives them a bit more qualifications against the other people, I guess. So really important, yeah. Any other ideas?
Maybe some students are interested in validating their current level of English as well.
Good, yeah, really good point, yeah. Good. Okay.
So I was going to say it's also motivating and a confidence boost for people who've been, in Greece for a while, stuck in the same place.
Good, I really like that, yeah. It does, I guess doing the exam can do a lot for self-esteem, and we certainly saw that with our students. Like the looks on their faces when they got their results. We actually have a video which I can give you a link to later. Like they're just glowing. It's amazing to see what this did for their self-esteem. It's absolutely fantastic, yeah. Do you have any other suggestions?
Some of them might be interested in going to university, and so that's obviously an important requirement. And along the same lines as motivation and kind of studying with a goal, it provides a lot of structure and very concrete steps for students to take to feel that they're moving forward. And since a lot of them, that in my experience, struggled a lot with kind of structuring their learning and kind of setting targets, that obviously provides a lot of help.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Brilliant. Yeah. Do we have any more ideas? Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing those. I'm just going to put on the screen now some ideas from our students. So we've got here from one of our Syrian students. He said, I can put it on my CV and it gives me more chance to work. So a really realistic viewpoint there of why he wants to do the exam, really pragmatic as well. And then here we've got, oh, I can't really see this because of your faces are covering it. Let me just move that over a sec. So one of our students from Afghanistan said, "It means a lot to me. It's really important for my future, especially for finding a job." So I think quite a few of our students, we had 7 take the exam. Quite a few of them did it with the idea that it would help them get employment in the future. So they were thinking really pragmatically about that, which is really cool. Okay, let me just move on to the next slide. So I'll go now into organising the exam. I'll briefly explain how we organise the exam and give you suggestions for how you might do it as well. So the first thing that we did was contact lots of different exam boards in Thessaloniki, because that was our local city. And we waited to see what came back, really, to gain further advice from them. Language Cert was one of the companies that got back to us with the most information, and they were really, really helpful explaining the process to us. So we chose to go with them because they were just so empathetic to our cause. They really wanted to help us. And that brings me on to my second point, which is discounts. So it doesn't say openly on the website, but some exam boards will offer discounts to charities and organisations that are not government funded. So we managed to get 50% off for every student, which was amazing. And it meant we could put more students into the exam with the funds that we had. So I would definitely ask about discounts, even if there's nothing advertised. As I say, there was nothing advertised with Language Cert, but they were super, super helpful. My third point would be fundraising and paying for the exam. So again, we were really open with the exam board about our situation. We said we were going to fundraise. We didn't know exactly how long it would take us to fundraise. And we also asked if we could pay a deposit instead of the full amount to secure the exam and then pay the rest later. The exam board was really, really good with this, and they extended the deadline. So they gave us, I think, an extra 10 days so we could pay the deposit, and then we paid the rest in installments, which was really helpful. So we could fundraise, but we also had the exam booked ready, so we didn't miss that deadline, which was brilliant. And then my final point is registering the students. So there are 2 ways you can do this. You can do this in the post on a paper form, or you can do it online, which is much easier, I guess. And all you should need are the white cards of your students, and the information like their parents' surname and stuff like that, date of birth. So that's really straightforward too, once you've got the information from your students. So this is an example of the timetable from Language Cert, which is the exam board that we chose to use. As I say, we chose Language Cert because they were the most helpful with us, and they gave us the most advice, and they just seemed really keen to get our students to the exam. So we were really happy to go with them on a pragmatic basis. Here you've got a list of the exams that should have taken place in June and July, but I imagine these might be postponed because of coronavirus. But you can see there all of the locations that you can possibly do the exam. And there's even like kiosks, which really surprised me. So if you have students and your organisation is on kiosks, they can access the exam, which is really cool as well. Because I know for people on Samos and Lesbos, there might not be the same opportunities to be able to get to the exam in the first place. So as you can see there's Athens, there's Thessaloniki, Volos, lots of different cities where you can access the exam. And it also shows you on this side of the screen as well, which exam levels they can take and when they need to be registered by and all that kind of information. Okay.
If I have questions, do I wait or can I ask them now?
Fine. You can ask, yeah, as we go. I'll just go back.
Yeah, sorry. Just a quick question on this kind of language cert, language exams. How recognized are they in terms of international recognition for institutions like universities?
That's a really good question. So they have a link on their website which explains where they are accepted, and they are accepted at UK universities, but there's a long list of all the different institutions that will accept them. But Colette will send out the link to that in an email following the training. So you'll be able to check all of that. No problem. Really good question though. Does anyone else have a question about this slide before we move on?
How about fundraising? How did you do it?
Okay, good question, Anna. We will come to the fundraising in about 4 slides, and I'll explain exactly how we fundraised and how successful we were with that. A really good question.
Thank you.
No problem. Okie doke. So, when it comes to preparing your teachers, I've broken this down into 4 steps. So the first step is resources. So what you're actually going to use to train your teachers to be able to teach effectively. So if you go onto the Language Cert website, again, all of the links will be sent out after the training. There are past exam papers for every level, and there are listening exercises, and there are also videos of students taking the spoken language exam. So you can watch all of these and see exactly what's expected. And you can also print off the old exam papers from previous years and use these to go through with your students. So there's absolutely loads of resources online to help you with this. And the next thing is training your teachers, as we probably already do, to do skills-focused lessons. So the exam is testing the 4 skills of speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So we found when we were doing the lessons that it was better to focus and say, this lesson is focusing on writing, and then have a task that is really, really focused on using vocabulary, using correct grammar, and tell the students what they're focusing on so they can really challenge themselves in that area. We found that really useful. The third point is using past papers. So as I said, on the Language Cert website, there are past exam papers for every exam that they've ever sat. So I think they've been doing this for about 7, I think there's 7 past exams that you can look at for each level. So there's lots and lots of stuff. When we were teaching for the exam, we took tasks out of the exam papers and used them to base a lesson around so that we knew we were doing exactly what was expected in the exam. And it also helped our students to know what the questions would look like when they actually do the exam. And it saves a lot of time with lesson planning because you already have the activities there. You just need to teach so the students can complete the activity. So it gives you a nice focus for your lessons. And the last thing is marking and assessment. So one thing that is super important when training for the exam is making sure that you are checking the students' work and correcting any mistakes so they don't keep misspelling the same word or they don't keep using poor grammar in the same way. Obviously, it does seem harsh to do this because it is extremely difficult, as we know, for our students to be learning English when a lot of them are using different alphabets in their own language. But it does them no favors to say, yeah, this is amazing if there are lots of mistakes, because in the exam, the examiner won't be kind to them about that. So I think that's really, really important, is to assess the work that is produced each lesson. Okay, so coming on to the exam now, there's an example of what the exam looks like on the screen there. The exam is broken into 2 parts. So you can actually just register for the written exam or the spoken exam, or you can register for both. I think you have a choice around that. At least you did when we registered. So the spoken exam is really short. It lasts for 9 minutes, and it's done in a 1-to-1 basis. So when we did the exam, the students would go in one by one to a room with the examiner, and they would be asked to voice an opinion about something, but not very controversial things, usually things like, when is it appropriate to use a mobile phone? So really straightforward tasks there for them to discuss their opinion. They also do a role play, so maybe pretending that they're in a supermarket and they're trying to buy something, or they're asking about the price of something. So the spoken exam is really quick and broken into those activities, which is quite nice. And you can see examples of people doing the spoken exam on the YouTube channel, and I'll send a link to that as well, so you can watch people do the exam. The next part is the written exam. So this is quite a bit longer. It varies depending on the level, but it's around 2 hours and 40 minutes long. And within this exam, you have the listening activity first, where they'll listen to recordings and they'll choose the correct sentences or topics on their exam paper, on their answer sheet. Then they go on to reading activities. So there are a series of passages and paragraphs that they'll read. They can maybe fill in the blanks, or they will have to write a summary of what they've read, depending on the level. And finally, there is the written part of the exam, focusing on writing. This is usually broken into 2 tasks. One will be an informal letter to a friend, maybe something like, tell me about your city, or tell me about a hobby that you are working on. And the other part will be a formal written exercise, maybe write an email for this competition to win a leisure centre membership card or something along those lines. And they'll be tested there on how to actually draft an email, the structure to use, and using formal language. So there's lots of different skills being tested. And when you look through the past exams, you can see this really, really clearly. As I said, the audio resources can be found on the Language Cert website, so all of the listening clips, or you can look on their YouTube channel and you can watch people actually do the exam and see like what is expected, what is asked, and you can maybe show this to your students as well to make them less anxious about this part of the exam. Okay. So now coming on to preparing your students. So the first point I want to make, which we're all aware of, I guess, is that a lot of our students will never have been examined before in a formal setting. A lot of their education has been disrupted. Some of them won't have finished secondary school or university or whatever they were working on when they had to leave their country. So there might be a lot of anxieties and worries about what an exam looks like and what the expectations are. So it's really important to have conversations with your students about what is expected of them and to frame this as a positive opportunity, not something that is scary or stressful. The second point is to familiarize your students with the exam paper. So a really good way of doing this is printing off an exam paper and just giving it to your students and letting them look through and see, what does it actually look like? How big is it? What do the questions look like? Are there pictures inside? So they can see it before they go and take the exam. So that won't be the first time they're presented with the paper. After you've done this, you can then explain exactly how the exam is broken down. But I think it's really important to give them a physical copy so they can actually see the exam. I think that's really helpful for them. And then they can ask any questions that come to them as they're reading through. It's really important as well to make your classroom a safe space. As I said, a lot of our students haven't been examined before or in a really long time. It's really important that they feel safe to voice their concerns, their worries, and any questions they have about the exam, so that they're not holding these concerns in and they get to the exam and they get really stressed and can't focus and it causes bigger problems. So if you just make it really clear that any questions are welcome about the exam, and you can also repeat the structure of the exam, anything that would make the students more comfortable and feel like this is a really positive opportunity and not something to be scared of. And as I mentioned before, preparing your students really well by using skills-focused lessons and drilling into them that there are 4 skills that they'll be tested on, and that's it. If they can do those 4 skills, they will do well in the exam, and they need to be practicing certain sub-skills within there. Like for instance, with writing, you need formal writing and informal writing and things like this. But that should really, really prepare your students. And the easiest way to do that is by using the past exam tasks and questions, so you know exactly what is being asked of them. And it also saves you time in having to think of questions that fit the A1 level or the A2 level because they already exist for you. Okay, so teaching for the exam. So as one of you mentioned earlier, it's a really, I think it was Genevieve, it's a really good way to teach when you've got a clear target to meet, which you do when you're training for the exam. You know exactly what's expected of your students, so you know exactly what you need to prepare them for. So when we were teaching for the exam, we made clear that we should focus on a variety of topics, because in the exam, you can be discussing maybe a city, maybe a leisure centre, maybe travelling. It can be a really wide range of topics. And what you don't want is your students going in there and not understanding the terms that are used in the question or not understanding the topic that's being discussed. As well as this, focusing on those 4 key skills and widening vocabulary every time you have a chance to do this. Again, this will stop the students coming across words in the exam that they're not familiar with, because as we know, that could be really scary and really throw them off if they don't understand the key terms in the question. Okay, when it comes to planning lessons, as I said before, we borrowed tasks from past exam papers to make the students familiar with what the questions looks like, and it also helped us really focus our lessons to the exam. So we're not teaching extra things that are not really relevant. We also used discussions to build students' confidence, voicing their opinions. So the education coordinator that I worked with, Jordan, she used to do lessons where she just sat at the table, the students sat around, and she'd give them a topic and they would just discuss it for the whole lesson. And people's opinions would come out. It didn't need to be really structured because we had quite opinionated students who would just do that naturally. But if you do have shyer students, you could maybe structure that activity, giving different students an argument to make, and then they can gain some confidence with voicing different opinions and responding to others as well. And the next point is to use newspaper articles, letters, posters, advertisements, and then give the students questions about what they are about. So you could give someone a newspaper article, maybe about the coronavirus lockdown, and then give them some questions like, what date did it start? What were the regulations that people had to follow? Just to test their reading skills and see that they can pull information out of a larger body of text. We found that really useful as well. And the final point is to teach clear structures for writing in your lessons. So for instance, in the exam, your students might be asked to write an email. So they need to know how to draft an email. What would you say in the first line? What is appropriate language to use in an email? Even if it's formal, it's still slightly less formal than, say, writing a letter. So the students need to know exactly what is expected of them. So when they see email in the question, they know I do this, this, and this. And they're really, really prepared for that question. Okay. So what I've made here is an example lesson that we will look at in a moment. But first, I want us to look at a past question that was used in the exam. So I just took this from the Language Cert website from a past exam for the B2 exam. So it's quite a high level. And as you can see here, this is the kind of activity that would be expected in the written part of the exam. So what I would like to do now is, can we read through this example question? And then I want us to think about possible challenges the students would have with this question. Okay, so what challenges, what issues a student might have when they see this in the exam. So I'll just give you a few minutes and then I'll ask for some feedback.
Is there any chance we can make it a bit bigger? It's a bit, is anybody else, can they read it okay? It's quite small on my screen.
Let me think, how can I make it bigger? I think I might have to come out of the PowerPoint and come back in. Let me have a think.
Can everybody read it okay? Maybe it's just me.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay.
I can see it okay, yeah.
Oh, sorry about that, it is quite small. Okay, so you can see in this question that the skill being tested is writing. The students are being asked to use an email format when responding, and there is clear criteria provided to help them structure their response, and there's also a clear word count of what's expected of them to write. But what kind of challenges might they still face even though they have this information already?
If they didn't know the word facilities, they wouldn't be able to properly answer most of the email.
That's a really good point, yeah. So the vocabulary that is used is not necessarily what we use when we normally speak English. I rarely say the word facilities in my life, and I doubt many of you guys do either. So this is why it's really important to look back through the exams and pull out vocabulary and things like that and see what's expected in the exam, so then we can teach these to our students. But really good point, the vocabulary is quite challenging and some of it is a little bit unusual, so it might not have been taught before. Really good point. What else might be a challenge?
I would say the context, like leisure center. So students might not understand what exactly a leisure center is. So then they wouldn't be able to write the email, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, if you don't know what a leisure centre is, you might have to take a guess. You might be able to figure it out if you know what leisure means. You might be able to guess. But again, this is one of the things that we need to prepare the students for beforehand. If we try and go through all of the past exams for that level, so there are, I think, 7 for each level, and pull out all of this vocabulary and all of these topics and try to teach similar things beforehand, because they will go around and use the same kind of topics, or at least the same level of vocabulary. So we can kind of prepare in that way for things like that. Yeah, really good point. What else might be a challenge?
Perhaps the word limit. Perhaps the word limit could be challenging for them. Some people use A4 papers if they practice writing, or they use smaller notebooks. So it's a good idea to make sure that that we will tell the students that they will write in, for example, an A4 page paper, so that it would be a good idea to practice writing and counting words beforehand, in order to feel fully prepared when they go to the exam. They know exactly, what they should do. They know exactly the length. For example, 100 words is half a page. They should know that by the time they should know that at exam time, when they go and start producing a piece of writing, the writing shouldn't exceed the half page, something like that. They should get familiar with the length of the writing.
Yeah, that's a fantastic idea, yeah. Because in the exam, they won't have time to go through and count every word. They need to know what it looks like on a piece of paper. So that's a really good point. If you say 150 words is half a piece of A4 paper, then they know kind of when they finished without counting. So that's a really, really good point. Yeah, thank you. Are there any other challenges that we think our students would face?
And also, perhaps students should practice the structure of an email in a piece of paper as well. They should know what an email looks like in a printed form.
Yeah, brilliant. Exactly. And as teachers, we can create models of this. So you could, if you have a whiteboard in your classroom, you can maybe draw up what it would look like and have them copy it down. So just an email with the introduction, the ending and the sign off, just so they know what it looks like. And then they can fill in the content in the middle of the email. Well, that's a really good idea. Having them familiar, so when they see email, they don't have to pause and think, how do I write an email? They know it's like this quick. They know email, I do 1, 2, and 3.
Yes,
Yeah.
they should know the structure and the length of it.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure there are a lot of samples. There are a lot of samples in students' book or teachers' book, so it would be a good idea to give them a copy of them, so they will be familiar.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea, definitely. And if you're looking for where to get these structures from, they're in textbooks, they're in the British Council, even if you Google UK email format, you can find them everywhere, and you can check for yourself if you think that they're appropriate for your students. Some of them will be more complicated and higher level, but as long as they can do the basics of a greeting, like an introductory line, and signing off appropriately, then they'll get the marks for meeting that format, which is really good.
Yes.
Okay. Any more challenges? Okay, cool. I'll give you one that we found when we did this with our students. So our B1 students started to prepare for the B2 exam, which has obviously been cancelled, unfortunately, because of the coronavirus. And one of our students sent me their example and said, can you sort of look through what I wrote today for this email? And I noticed that he had written the name and the email address as the person's full name. So they wrote, Dear Joanne Blair, as one word, because it's not apparent where the family name is and when the first name is, because there's no capital letter, and they weren't familiar with the name Joanne, so they were not sure where the name cut off. So this is something, again, that is really difficult when you're using names that people might not be used to in Syria or Afghanistan. I know if I looked at a person's name written in Farsi, I wouldn't know where the cutoff was between the first name and the family name. So things like that are important to go through in class, but you'll see that when your students write their work, you'll see mistakes like this and be able to teach them to your class, because some students may not have done that, whereas others would. But it's just little things like that to pick up on as you teach. Well, thank you for your responses to that. I'm going to show you now an example lesson I made based on this activity. So here I've used a 4-part lesson plan, which we usually use in UK secondary schools to test learning and make sure that the skills are being used throughout the lesson. So the 4-part lesson plan starts with the starter activity. This activity should test students' existing knowledge on a topic. Now, I just want to ask, why do you think it's important to use a starter activity with a refugee community?
I think it's a good idea to start an activity with a lot of different communities. Just have an idea where people's starting line is and to be able to work from their prior knowledge.
Brilliant, yeah, brilliant. So the thing you just said there, prior knowledge, I think sometimes, I know I did this when I first started teaching at OCC, I completely took for granted that people are coming into the classroom with information to begin with and with knowledge about topics, and that I wasn't just giving them all of my knowledge. Like, it's really, really important, especially teaching adults, to recognize that they're bringing knowledge with them. And I think this can do a lot for self-esteem as well, to take knowledge from the students and then teach that back to the other students and learn yourself. Because I think teaching shouldn't just be a one-way system of me giving knowledge to students. It should be me taking knowledge from them as well. And then we can build something together. I think that's a really good way to use these activities. And as I say, we use these in UK secondary schools as well, to, as Eliza said, to test knowledge and to know what needs teaching. Because if you find that the students know this already, then you can move forward really quickly. If you find that they don't, you can spend more time teaching and filling those gaps. So I think it's a really useful place to start. So the next activity is the introduction activity. So this should involve the teacher giving new information or a new skill to the students. Then you move on to the main activity. So this should involve the students completing an activity using this new information or this new skill. And finally, the plenary activity. This should show the learning that has taken place. So this could be a peer assessment activity, it could be students reading out their work, it could be you reading their work, anything to test that they have learned what you wanted them to learn that lesson and that they are now able to use that skill. So for the past paper question we were just looking at, I've created this kind of simple lesson plan to show how I would teach so that the students could do this question successfully. So I would start with the starter activity. I would ask the students to list all of the techniques needed to write a clear argument. So things like facts, opinions, and statistics, and get them to draw up a list together of what they would need. Then in the introduction activity, I would list all of the useful answers that they'd come up with that fit on the whiteboard, and we would together add any that are missing. So say if someone had missed facts, I might try and prompt the students to come up with this answer. The teacher would then show the students how to structure a clear argument and how to do that in an email format. So as the question was asking, it was a competition to sort of persuade the leisure centre to give the student a membership card. So they need to be using those arguing skills and those persuasive skills to achieve a good mark in this question. So then the main activity would be students using the structures that the teacher had given them and the argument techniques, and they would try to complete the question that we just looked at. And you would give them an appropriate time that they would have in the exam, maybe 20 minutes, to complete that on their own and see what they can come up with. And then as the final activity, I find this quite useful in group classrooms. So get the students to read through each other's work. So you're not assessing it as the teacher, but they're assessing it as the students. And then they can go through and label argument techniques that they see. And they can also highlight any mistakes that they find and then give this back to the student and they can correct their work. But I think this is a really good way of students learning from each other. So maybe they struggled with the activity, but they can look at their friends' work and kind of understand how to do it a little bit better. and sometimes they can learn from that really well. And also going through and picking out mistakes is really good, because they might not see them in their own work, but they might be able to see them more easily in their friends' work. So do you guys have any questions about this lesson so far?
No.
No? Okay, cool. Okay, if you have any questions that come to you, we'll have time at the end, so please just write them down, and we can come back to them later on. Cool. So I've got an activity for you guys to do now. So I thought we can try using the 4-part lesson plan, which is on the screen. And I'd like you to create your own lesson for the exam question on the screen here. So this is for the B1 exam. So it's one level below the question we just looked at. And it's writing a letter to a friend. Tell your friend about a new hobby that you have just started doing and explain what you like about it. Write between 100 and 120 words. Okay. So what I would like you to do is create a question based upon this exam question using the 4-part lesson structure to think about how you would prepare your students to answer this well. Okay. So I think Colette is going to put you into breakout rooms now. Okay, so how did you guys find that activity? What did you come up with for your lessons?
Yeah, it was really interesting to do. I think we ended up talking quite a lot about the different ways that you could lead into it.
Nice. And what kind of ideas did you come up with there?
Do you want to share, Anna?
You go on, you start first.
Neither of us are willing to take responsibility. We said that we start the class with a kind of conversation about hobbies and just prompting questions, and depending on class size, it could either be the whole group or pairs or small groups, just to get that conversation going and the vocabulary activated.
Cool, I like that idea, yeah. And it's really active as well, isn't it? Because you can do a written starter and get straight into it, or you can do it verbally and still have the same results and have maybe more interest because they're actually speaking. That's a really good idea. I like that.
Okay, we just said that it's important to clarify the meaning of the word hobby, because some people confuse hobbies with other like pastime activities like watching TV. So, you know, and I don't know if the concept of hobby exists in their culture. I don't know. For example, if you talk about hobbies in a Syrian sort of setting, maybe people don't know what this is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so we also said it would be a really good idea to do a brainstorming activities. If it's a small group, maybe all the students can bring in ideas in the classroom. That's it, really. Is that right, Eliza?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. It's a really good idea. And you're pulling together, as you say, like all of the different ideas from everyone in the classroom. Because as you say, in different cultures, maybe hobbies are perceived differently. Like in a lot of different countries, people might do what we would call a hobby as their job. Like they might cook for their job, or they might make clothes, or some kind of artistry for their job.
Or they might say, I'm sleeping. They might think sleep is a hobby.
Yeah, equally. Yeah, definitely. That's a really, really good point. Yeah. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think that was about it.
Cool. Okie doke. Yeah, that's brilliant. And it really prepares the students to answer that question. And you've thought about things that we didn't think about in our group. So I think if we pull together our ideas, that's a really good chance. Because I completely missed the defining hobbies, completely missed that. So that's a thing that it's really important to do, which I forgot there, to go through the question and circle the key words and ask your students to say, are there any words that you don't understand in this question? And then it might be something that you take for granted, like I took that for granted there. And and then they can be completely confused and you don't know why, and they say, well, I don't know what hobby means, and you're 20 minutes into the lesson. So really good point there. Yeah. Nicole, do you want to feedback what we worked on together?
Yeah, sure. Basically, what we talked about was that for the starter activity, to ask the students to come up with a list of adjectives and adverbs to describe their hobbies. And yeah, so, and for introduction activity was more of like adding on, writing the useful suggestions on the board, and also telling the students that like when they are writing to a friend, it means like informal letter format. So telling them the letter format for informal letter. Yeah. So totally different from what you guys have discussed.
I think it's nice as well, because if you pull together what we've both done, like it really pulls together to make a really strong lesson as well, because we both went in completely different angles and picked up on things that the other team didn't think about. So I think activities like this are really good. Like pulling up on my blind spot, for instance, about defining the words in the question. Really good idea. Does anyone have any like questions or comments about this before we move on?
We were talking about this before, weren't we? And we were saying it's really, we're making this lesson plan based on like expectations of prior knowledge of English, right? So kind of like grammar structures and vocabulary known. It depends like the way you go about doing this lesson, you know, whether it's about kind of the adjectives or if it's more about the hobbies themselves. We're going off kind of expectations of prior knowledge. So it's like taking a step back and thinking, okay, so before we even get to the writing activity, we must teach those that vocabulary, or we know our students and we know that they know that already. We were talking about that before, weren't we? About they know.
Yeah, it's really important as well, because obviously when we plan lessons, I think we imagine our classes and we plan for them even without realizing it. And we kind of presume, oh, my class can use sentences really well, they're really good with grammar, so I would do this. And then another person might be imagining their class who maybe are weaker with grammar, or their vocabulary is limited, so they go down another path. So yeah, absolutely, like knowing your classes will change the way that this lesson looks. And if we all taught the same lesson to all of our different classes, some of us would teach a really good lesson and some of us would teach things that they already knew and it wouldn't be as useful. So absolutely factor in what they already know, what they're good at, what they need to work on when you're preparing them for this stuff. And give them the chance to speak as well in the lesson. Like I said before, like get them to look at the exam question and circle like the words they don't understand, and maybe ask questions, because we might not think of things that they do. And I know I can talk a lot and sometimes talk for my students and don't give them a chance to like feedback to me because I presume things. But yeah, absolutely asking them to feedback. They'll tell you things that you might not have thought of, and it can make your lesson much more useful to them all. Yeah, thank you for feeding back there. So this is just some quick feedback from 2 of our students. So 7 of our students took the exam. They all passed, which was incredible and a really lovely day to see those results come in. And this is just some feedback from 2 of our students. So one of them said, I wasn't too nervous in the exam, I just did what I could. And the other one said, it wasn't extremely easy and it wasn't too difficult, it was in the middle. So like super honest about how they found the exam. And actually when we put our students in for the exam, a lot of them could have done really well in the B2 exam, but due to funding and trying to get as many students to get a qualification as possible, we chose to go with the B1, which might have been slightly too easy, because we'd rather have 7 students have the B1 than 3 students have the B2. We made that judgment call there based on funding and what was in the interest of our students. yeah, just to explain why they might have found it so easy there. Okay, so I'm just gonna explain the fundraising strategy. So at OCC, we have 2 volunteers who all they work on is fundraising, and they're amazing, and they both studied at a university and know how to use social media much better than I do. So this is their work, and they did an amazing fundraising project for us. So firstly, they used a lot of short videos of students and teachers and shared them on social media. So they would come into Jordan's classes and just film her teaching, and just ask the students, like, what are you working on? Why is the exam important to you? All these kinds of things. And it was just really naturally filmed, and the students just giving feedback. And it put a really human face on our fundraising campaign. All of our students were happy to be in the film, happy for their names to be used and other information, which I think really helped, because when people gave money, they could see, like, oh, I'm giving this money to Salam, or I'm giving this money to Mohammed. And it really helped to see, like, this is exactly where the money's going. And I think that helped us raise money quite quickly. Another thing was being transparent about the costing. So you can see there on the screen, one of the images says what for, and it's got a breakdown of the money. And it explains really clearly, like, this is how much the bus costs to Thessaloniki, this is how much the exam costs, this is how much whatever else we need costs per student, and adds it up to the exact euro of what we need to get them to the exam. So I thought that was really useful as well. We didn't just set, like, we're trying to raise £1,000. We said we need to raise this much times 7, because that's how many students we need to pay for. So I thought that really helped as well, being super transparent with everyone who was giving money. As well as that, we reached out to our past and present volunteers. OCC has been going for, I think, 3 years now, maybe 4. So they have, like, hundreds of past volunteers who've come out for maybe a month or 2 months, who know what the project is, who know the students, and who can share the fundraising campaign with their family and friends. And people are much more likely to give, I think, if they know the organisation. So that worked really, really well, and it shared really widely across social media just by using our past volunteers. It was really, really helpful. When it comes to timescale, we managed to raise €729 in 1 week. So it was really, really quick, and we were really shocked. We didn't expect this. Like, we set a timetable of 2 months, I think, to raise this money, but we managed to raise it really, really quickly. And I think that was thanks to the social media team and these amazing videos they made, really putting a human face on the campaign, and just sharing it so widely across social media. I think that really helped us there. And we had obviously quite a bit of money left over if you look at what we needed to what we raised. So then that money went to, well, was going to go to pay for the B2 exam, which has now been postponed. But yeah, do you have any questions about the fundraising strategy?
Okay, what is not clear about me is, like, for example, can I go and ask OCC if they can offer me any help on how to set up something like that?
I imagine so, yeah. I can give you the contacts for our social media team. I'm sure they'd be more than happy to send over advice on how to do these things.
Yeah, it would be helpful. I mean, I do teach students, and I think it would be really great if they could have the chance to have an exam. But this is an extra cost for the organization. So if I could, it would be great if somebody could help us, getting there.
Of course, yeah. After the training, if you want to email me, Colette will send out my email. I can put you in touch with Carlos and Manu, who are our social media team, and I'm sure they would be so happy to, like, spread their knowledge on what they did. Because I only understand the surface of how to do all this stuff, but yeah, I'm sure they can share that with you.
Good,
Yeah.
thank you.
No problem, no problem. Any other questions or comments about this?
I guess
Okay.
Oh, someone else have a question? I jumped in. No?
No, that was me. So.
About kind of your students were happily kind of filmed, they had their photos taken, but sometimes that can be an issue, can't it, with in anonymity and not wanting to have your photo taken. So I guess that's a decision that each organization has to take. But like you said, I think it really helped in your fundraising strategy to have those photos because it made it much more personal. People felt connected to the students.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that's something that's maybe specific to Polycastro, maybe because a lot of people have been there for so long, they feel a bit more settled. They're happy to have their pictures taken. They're happy to have their names out there. But I know from working in Samos that that's really not the case in a lot of organizations. And people have a multitude of reasons for not wanting to share that. I think when it comes to that, if you look at the other image we used, you can use like blurred faces. You could use footage, but the back of people's heads. So maybe film the teacher teaching from the back of the classroom, but then it's got nobody's faces in the video, but you can still see the class taking place if the students would be happy. But of course it depends on your individual students. Maybe some would be happy to take part, or maybe you could do interviews, but without the face of the student. You could have like their voice speaking over, and then a montage of images or something like that. But you could still use your students if they're happy to, while maintaining anonymity. There are ways to like navigate around it while still kind of making it personal. But of course it's up to your students what they're happy with.
Okay.
Any other questions about this? No? Cool. Okie doke. So I was wondering, do you guys have any ideas about how you might fundraise for your campaign, looking at what we did at OCC, or what you've done in the past to raise money? Any ideas?
I think if we were going to do something, we would probably do something quite similar in that it's worked for us to kind of share a specific goal that we have or a need that needs meeting, make it personal, and then reach out to past volunteers who've been really successful in getting it all over social media. And we too have had, surprising fundraising achievements when past volunteers have been involved.
Brilliant. And we share a lot of the same volunteers. I guess you know a lot of the students from OCC.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking the fellow who took your exam, he was in my level 1 class, like not that long ago, which is crazy.
No way. That's amazing.
Fast learner.
Yeah, definitely. I know that our students work super hard outside of class as well, like, and they often go to We Are Here classes as well as OCC classes, so they have like so much English tuition, which definitely helps them to excel really quickly. But yeah.
It looks like a really great campaign you guys put together.
Thank you. As I say, this is our social media.
We don't have one of those.
I'm sure you can borrow Okie doke. I'll move on to the next slide here. So these are just some quotes I took from one of the videos our social media team made after the results came out. And we realized that all of our students had passed the exam. So here we've got Ramazan and Mohammed talking about how they felt when they got the results and anything they wanted to say to people who donated money so they can take the exam in the first place. Cool. And if you want to have a look at any of the videos that we used as part of this campaign, they're all on the Open Cultural Centre Instagram account, and they're also on the Open Cultural Centre Facebook page. So if you want to look through, take ideas from them, I'm sure we'd be more than happy to share those.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And I'll get in touch with Carlos and Manu as well and see if they can maybe put together like some guide and for how to set one of these up, and see if they're happy to share their email addresses so you can contact them directly.
It would be great, yes.
Yeah, because I think there's no point having all of this good knowledge if we don't share it, because we're all reaching for the same aim, I guess. So yeah,
Sure.
super important to share this around. Okay, just to finish on almost, a really important question. How do we choose which students take the exam? So of course this will be different across different organisations, but I'd just like you to think, how might you choose from your students?
What I have done in the past, I just gave all students a mock test and see how well they do it in real time. Okay, and this is one of the best criteria, I think. It's one of the best criteria to choose who is going to take an exam and who isn't. Of course, it's classroom participation and, you know, increasing motivation and everything. But I think if you give them a sample, if you give them a past paper and do it in real time, then it's a very good indicator who is likely to pass the exam and who is not, actually.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I know that when we chose our students to do the exam, we did something kind of similar. We just chose the highest level of students because this was the trial run, I guess, to see if this project would work. So we chose our level 3 class, which was probably around B1, B2. And we asked them if they wanted to do the exam. The ones who did were put into an exam class, and we prepared them and did the exam. Yeah, but we did it off kind of who was more able to pass the exam. And we chose the B1 exam, as I said before, because it was the most students we could examine with the money that we thought we would have. So we made a lot of decisions off what was realistic rather than any other kind of judgments there. What about you, Eliza? How do you think you would choose students from We Are Here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be looking at the highest class and taking that call, because then that would also be a motivating factor for students in lower classes, to kind of get them to keep on their work. Yeah.
Yeah, I like
had
that.
A question that was, I don't know if you're already going to answer it. It was about how much time this took from like starting your classes until the exam. How much time was spent in exam prep?
Okay, Nicole actually asked me this before. So me and Jordan both got to Policastro in September, and then I think it was the beginning of October that we started to properly prepare our students for the exam. And they took the exam on, when was it? In December, I think mid-December they took the exam, maybe the 16th. And they did really well in the exam. But as I mentioned before, we put them in for the B1. Most of them could have done really well in the B2. So we were at an advantage there because our students were already quite a high level. They just needed to be trained how to answer the questions, but they had a lot of the knowledge already there. So we managed to do it in like two and a half months. But it completely depends on where your classes are. And I think as well, like looking through the exam papers and choosing a level is really important as well, and choosing what's realistic, because you've also got to think about what if you put the students in for an exam that's going to challenge them a lot and then some of them fail, because I think that could have quite a bad backlash with the students' self-esteem and things like that. but these are all things we have to think about with the money that we have and the students that we have, I guess. And it's completely up to organisations to make those judgment calls. But yeah, as I said, it took us about 2.5 months, but maybe some classes would need more time.
Okay, and how many hours per week, roughly?
They had quite a lot of time, actually, because Jordan was teaching the level 3 class, which involved people who weren't taking the exam, but they kind of trained them as well for the future. And then there was the level 4 class, so they had 2 hours every day for 4 days a week. So they had a lot of training, and they would also practice away from class, and I know Jordan would do extra sessions with them if they needed them as well. So they had a lot of tuition to do that, which I'm aware not all organisations can do 2 hours a day. It's a lot of time to dedicate to one class.
Thanks.
No problem.
I was on mute. Eliza, you had some other good questions that you put in the form, right? How many hours? Did you face any issues of students wanting to sign up mid-course? If so, how did you manage? Was that your question?
Yeah, that was another.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And Jordan dealt with this as she was the education coordinator. We had, after we sort of floated the idea of doing exams and asked the level 3 class, there were a few students who said no, but there were also a few students who we didn't think would be able to pass the exam, and we didn't want to put them in so they would fail, because we thought that would be really humiliating for them, because the fundraising campaign was so public. And also we knew that if we just let them do the exam next time, then they would pass and we would avoid all of that. So we had one student who wanted to register afterwards and do the exam, who we thought was able to do it, so we let him do it. But then we had 2 more students who were at Greek school as well, so they didn't have the time to commit to the lessons, and were also weaker than the other students, so we didn't want to risk putting them in for the reasons I mentioned before. And we thought once they finish Greek school, then they can do the exam, because then they'll be able to come to all of the classes. But Jordan had those conversations with them about the time commitment. But yeah, it was difficult, and they were quite upset that they weren't able to do it. But we just tried to explain, like, pragmatically why we weren't putting them in, and also that this wasn't the only chance to do the exam, that there will be, if we can fundraise enough money, we can do multiple exams per year and put as many people through as possible, which is the end goal, I guess. But yeah, it's difficult to have those conversations, and I guess if you have a really good reason for not registering the students, just be completely honest with them. If they're not ready, they will be at some point. It's not a definite no forever. And I think it's probably useful for them to hear that, rather than take the exam and fail, because I think that would be really horrible for them.
Thanks.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I did have another. If no one else does. I want to know how much of the website you freely shared with the students while you were in process, because I'm guessing you've got to weigh up extra practice they could be doing on their own outside, with not wanting to spoil your own, like, assessment as you go and lessons and stuff. That's
a really good point. I'm not entirely sure, as Jordan taught the exam class, I don't think she necessarily told them to go on the website and look. I think she just gave them what she wanted them to look at. So she'd give them past exam questions. But we didn't really have any cases of the students, like, going on and then coming and saying, oh, I've done all of the past exam questions. But even if they do, if they do that, I guess it would only help them. And even if they come to your lesson and say, like, oh, I've done this before, then they can have another go and try to improve on what they did. So I don't know if it's necessarily like a a problem if they do that, but there are so many, like it would take them a really long time to go through all of the past exams and do all of the questions. But I guess it would only help them to prepare themselves. So
Okay, thanks.
no worries. Okay, do you have any more questions? Anyone? No? Okay, no worries. I think I've got, this was my question slide. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming today. It's been really nice to sort of reminisce over this project and talk to you guys about it and hear your questions. As I said before, like, I think it's so important to share this information because I know that so many organisations, including OCC, have been working for so long trying to get these exams done, and either like volunteers come and go and they don't have time to see it through to the end, or funding issues come in the way. But I hope that this has helped show that it's possible, and you can have great successes with your students, as we saw like all of our students passed, and now we've got the framework to do this with future classes, and we know that it's possible. So just a massive thank you to you all.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's been a massive help having someone else who's done it before, and like you say, has kind of created that framework and tested it. It feels less scary and unknown.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's
Thank
one of the reasons I
you.
wanted you to do this presentation, because I know it would be really useful for other projects to see how you did it. And thank you so much for sharing your time to do this presentation today. I'm going to do some little plugs for Refugee Ed. We have another webinar on Saturday about trauma-informed teaching. It's by a lady called Diana. She's got loads of experience of working in Greece, and her master's, not her master's, I think she's doing a doctorate is about trauma-informed education. So she's a very knowledgeable person. And the last thing is, if you don't mind, we have an evaluation form, which I'm putting in the chat now. It wouldn't take very long to fill out, and it really helps me to find out what you liked about the webinars, what can be improved, and some ideas for the future, and I can try and make those webinars happen. So if you could take 5 minutes to do the evaluation form, I'd really appreciate it. So thank you all for coming, and thank you, Freda, for your time and presenting and sharing your knowledge. It was really, really, really informative.
Thank you. If any of you need to get in touch, please email me. I'm happy to answer any other questions, or I can put you in contact with the team at OCC that's still there. Cool.
So would you like me to send you an email, just a reminder that I would like you to get me in touch with the OCC team?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, and I'll message them now and get them in touch.
Right.
And let us know if you do
Of course I will.
Start up these exams. It'd be great to hear how you get on.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.